The Library at Hellebore is a 2025 horror fantasy novel by Cassandra Khaw. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Listen! It was available at the library, and the concept for the book actually seemed like something I would enjoy. So yes, I ignored the 3.21 rating on Goodreads. That should have been my first indicator that this wasn't going to go well. Hell, I even ignored the 3.18 rating that it turned into less than a month later. And then the 3.17 it was at as of the writing of my notes for this review. I'm an optimist. I give them third chances. I give people chances to improve themselves. Except for T. Kingfisher. She only got 2 never again. So how did my third foray into Cassandra Khaw's writing go? Okay, so this is one of those recaps that's going to be pretty vague, I guess, and I'll be getting into why in the analysis portion, so hang tight. In this book, magic reawoke about 100 years ago, I think, and since I'm assuming this book takes place in the modern day, I'm guessing that this means around the 1920s. We're given just enough details about the world outside of Hellebore to suggest that this is more or less a modern-day setting. Hellebore is a school specifically for people with powers that run a bit more dangerous. Some people come to them voluntarily, others, like our protagonist Alessa Lee, are kidnapped and brought there against their will. Alessa can basically telekinetically rip people apart with her mind, and a while back she went on trial for murdering her stepfather after he molested her, and she was subsequently set free. You also have people like Grace Lynn, whose voice is basically like capable of compelling people to do what they're told, and then you have guys like Sullivan, who are cursed and basically has like locusts living inside of him, and then there's a kid named Adam, who's one of several antichrists, and then there's Rowan, who's a death worker and is basically able to kill anything just by touching it. People have compared this book to Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I personally would call it a too edgy Harry Potter X-Men mashup, but we'll get there eventually. This book made the choice, chapter to chapter, to flip back and forth between the present day, which is post-graduation, and Alessa's time at the school. It's mostly random hijinks that I don't even feel like I can recap because they're just so disjointed in terms of character development and storytelling, but it all ultimately leads up to graduation, where it's revealed that the staff are going to eat the students. A handful survive the ceremony, including Alessa, and they all end up trapped in the library. The staff tells them that the last person alive will be allowed to leave. What ensues is more disjointed hijinks. I don't think I need to tell you that Alessa ends up being the last one standing after being eaten by the staff, ostensibly as a result of her own powers. She puts her soul somewhere else and then somehow has physical form again at the end of the book somehow, some way, I don't know. I really don't know. There's one thing I need to get out of the way right now.
Beyonce, sweetie, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that an ugly actress would even say that.
As a Silent Hill fan, I deem Alessa Lee unworthy of the name Alessa. Unworthy. I find her annoying. She is so thin of character that I didn't even find her to be remotely interesting. Alessa Gillespie's hallowed name does not deserve to be associated with this book. Alessa Gillespie is a far more interesting, well-developed character than Alessa Lee ever will be. I will die on this hill. I think you might be able to guess from that alone that this is Cassandra Khaw's third and final strike for me. And there were so many reasons for this. I spent a long time staring at my computer screen trying to figure out how to best recap this book. And that's because the story is so messily assembled that I kind of struggled with what to recap, what order to recap it in, and what to include. The first issue with this book is, as I mentioned during the recap, almost every chapter flips back and forth between before, all of the events leading up to graduation, and days 1 and 2, which is after graduation while the remaining students are trying to survive in the library. I used a particular word during my recap: hijinks. And that's basically what the before sections of this book are. Loosely connected hijinks. They are short stories set in the Library of Hellebore's world, not an actual coherent, cohesive novel-length story. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, but that can be fun. And I would agree. With the right author at the helm, I don't inherently believe that a story structured this way is doomed to failure. It could work. In this case, it most definitely did not, but I think it could. You might think that because these are random anecdotes about Alessa's time at Hellebore, that we're going to get a deep and colorful look at the characters and setting, right? That Hellebore, the school, its students, and its staff will have a chance to shine and be well developed, right? Nope, not even slightly. I've said this before about Cassandra Khaw's characterization skills in Nothing But Black and Teeth and The Salt Grows Heavy, Both of those were novellas, and so I erred on the side of the thin characterizations being a result of being overly constricted by the size of a novella. Like, the author might have been better at this if not for trying to aim for under 40,000 words, which is considered the upper end of the word length or word limit that you would have for a novella. But nope, this is just how the author does things, apparently. There was so much time in this book to explore the characters, and instead we get the same flimsy, paper-thin characterizations as Nothing But Black and Teeth and The Salt Grows Heavy. Alessa is a grumpy, traumatized girl with hidden compassion on occasion. Portia is a quirky girl. Rowan is a quirky, funny boy. Minji is quiet and mysterious. Gracelyn is nice. Kevin is nice. Adam is a dick. Yoan, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's Oan, Yoan, I think. He's a terrified kid. Ford is a creepy simp. Sullivan is neutral, I guess. The headmaster and all the other staff are creepy and a little sinister. That's it. The only character who almost becomes compelling is Joanna, Alessa's roommate, once we learn her equally thin, sunny disposition belays a traumatic past. But we get no deeper than that, and it really just serves to add to the women are the victims of eternity narrative that Khaw seems to be going with in this book. Part of me wants to suggest that the cast is too big and that Khaw might have been more successful with a smaller one, but it occurs to me that that's literally what the novellas were like. Nothing But Black and Teeth only had 5 characters. The Salt Grows Heavy only had 2 main characters that it really needed to meaningfully hone in on, and both of those books, in my opinion, failed to meaningfully develop their characters. I would also posit that it spent very little time properly developing Hellebore as a school. Over halfway through the book, and the impression I got, bluntly, was that this was quirky to edgy Hogwarts. Actually, no, I'd argue that it's almost like a Deadly Class Harry Potter fusion alternative universe story, but quirkier and not nearly as controversial or truly dark as Deadly Class. This, despite the students murdering each other all the time. And just to make this clear, I referenced a book earlier called Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. When I say Deadly Class, I'm referring to the graphic novel series / TV show that was developed on Sci-Fi. Similar name, 2 different stories. In my opinion, the choice to hop back and forth between then and now did not help with the storytelling or literally anything else. If the story had started at the beginning and progressed until graduation and the fallout from it, we would have been building up to the mystery. I would know who the characters are from the get-go, and maybe with less hopping around, what little characterization we get would have flowed a bit better. Alternatively, we could have stayed in the library in the modern day for most of the book and had quick flashbacks to Alessa's early days at the school. We could have honed in on her memories of her fellow survivors, focus on telling us who they are, instead of wasting time talking about characters that are dead by the time the story really kicks off. One guy I mentioned, Sullivan. He's a really good example of this. We get a chapter towards the beginning of the book that's partly focused on him killing another student, and then he's basically absent for the rest of the book. We find out he was one of the first killed by the staff because Alessa tells us up front at the beginning of the book, before that chapter showing him killing the other student ever comes to pass. It's almost as though the author had, like, a concept in mind of this messed up, super dark Hogwarts Deadly Class type story, but only in flashes, only in isolated vignettes that don't really fit together as a cohesive story. I said that I felt like Legends and Lattes might have hit better as a visual work of art, like a painting or a graphic novel, and I feel like Library at Hellebore might be the same. I feel like it might have translated somewhat better to a visual medium like film or picture or graphic novel so that you can visually appreciate the atmosphere and oddities that can't be easily transmitted through writing. I'm having such a hard time explaining this, and I feel like some of it is because it's something you can only quite grasp if you've read the book and kind of see what I mean. How could a 300-page book fail to develop any of its characters or its setting, or tell a coherent story? You really do have to see it for yourself to understand how you can be inside of Alessa's head for the entire book and still have no better a picture of her than grumpy, traumatized girl with hidden compassion. So many characters have their backstories dumped on us, and yet it still gives me very little insight into their characters. It's absolutely wild how a book of this length didn't just, accidentally characterize its characters or develop its setting. On to the writing. The purple prose I've criticized Khaw's previous works for was present, though not quite as densely as in the novellas. I've said it before, and I'll say it again here, but much more bluntly. The type of purple and overly complex prose that Cassandra Khaw employs in this and other works strongly suggests a deliberate choosing of obscure and complex words. I have read authors with complex and poetic writing styles before and not had a problem with it. And that's because authors that are not trying to make their work as hard to read as possible are generally pretty good at giving enough context for readers to figure out what the words they're using mean. Even if you can't figure out the exact meaning of the word, you can usually deduce the vibe of it from context. From Library at Hellebore, we have the following examples of what I'm talking about. On page 16, quote, "I should have known what they were, the discolorations, the corroded grease size of dried blood," unquote. I apologize if I mispronounced that. I kind of defaulted to my sketchy memory of my one semester of French in college. Anyway, a grisaille is a monochromatic painting, usually in gray or brown. On page 40, quote, "Almost, but not quite as from beneath her teeth protruded the furred and dichroic points of a jumping spider's, chelicerae? Grown overly large." I think I said that right. I don't know. Dichroic means that something shows different colors when viewed from different directions, kind of like a crystal. I'm not flagging chelicerae. I think that's how you say it, because I can unfortunately easily figure out from context that we're talking about a spider's fangs, so I don't need to Google that one. I think I know what that one means. On page 130, Professor Fleur intimidates Alessa, and what follows is, "Trammeled, I did as I was told." Trammeled means to be deprived of freedom of action. A more common word for this would be enmeshed. I assure you, there are more than just this, but I'm not wasting my time quoting them all. It really bugs me because I recall seeing someone opine somewhere, I sincerely don't remember where, that Cassandra Khaw doesn't hold her readers' hands when it comes to this sort of writing, as in, they opined that her writing is challenging and that's a good thing. I disagree. Not on the idea that writing should not be challenging for readers, but particularly this author's way of doing that. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, I swear, but I read extensively and I have a pretty good vocabulary. I very rarely need to look up a word when I'm reading. Even if I don't know its exact meaning, I can usually figure out what the author is getting at from context. The vast majority of books that I've read, fiction and nonfiction, modern and classic, I rarely struggle with the vocabulary. Again, there is a difference between an author having and employing a naturally complex and poetic writing style and an author that deliberately chooses overly complex prose on purpose. Take, for example, that word I might be mispronouncing, grisaille. If you read that sentence back, corroded grisaille of blood, what would you intuitively guess that this word means? Because my guess would be something like stain or streaks. The word grisaille, which means a monochromatic painting, is a very unusual, very obscure word choice. The average reader doesn't know what that is, and there isn't nearly enough context to guess at what the word would mean. The context strongly indicates that it would be something like stain or streak because nothing else here would indicate that we're making an artistic reference. If you are trying to convey to the reader that this blood was so bizarrely splattered that it was practically forming into a grotesque painting, you either need to give more context to what the word grisaille means, or you need to reevaluate your word choice so that the reader gets what you're going for. Are you trying to tell a story that your audience will connect with, or are you trying to impress everyone with how many big words you know? What else? The gore. Library at Hellebore spends a lot of time going into minute details about acts of violence and the gore produced by them. More time than it's spent developing its characters, honestly. Now, don't mistake me, I'm not a prude and I'm perfectly fine with gore. I enjoyed Terrifier, for fuck's sake, and that's a different type of gore than the typical horror movie provides. But this book just seemed to, luxuriate in every single instance of gore and violence which happened on a semi-constant basis. And listen, for those of you who, like me, aspire to be horror writers yourselves one day, I need you to grasp one very, very simple concept. The more often you have gory or violent scenes in your book, the more desensitized your audience becomes to the horror that comes with those scenes. Unless, of course, you go full Aaron Beauregard and come up with the most inventively deranged scenes of violence and degeneracy known to man, but most of us are not prepared to go full Beauregard. Less is more. At some point, the blood, guts, and gore just become so commonplace in this novel that they cease to be interesting. It's just, oh, someone got disemboweled again. Oh, looky, another person got ripped to shreds. That's fun. More entrails. That's not getting old at all. Wow, Cassandra Khaw really likes the word effluvium. It does get old. And when the characters in question mean nothing to me because the author has failed to develop them into something worth caring about, their deaths don't hurt at all. I sensed that the author was trying to weave in themes of sexism, victimhood, and otherness into this novel, but they are handled so poorly it's not even funny. The storytelling is so bad that you can't weave much of anything through it, and Jesus, there were constant, snippy, toxic little remarks about men, about sexism, about patriarchy, misogyny, whatever. It was so heavy-handed and didn't come across as characterization so much as it did the author stating a defined truth about men and the female experience. And that's as deep as I'm going to go into that because I am more than capable of crashing out on this topic, and I will not be doing so today. No, thank you. Otherwise, I sensed some X-Men shit here. Okay, I don't know if I brought this up in a review before. I might have brought it up in like my Shatter Me review, possibly. But sometimes in the X-Men series, it really depends on who's writing it, comics, cartoons, movies, whatever. You will find that they try to like equate the fear of mutants with real-world prejudices and stigmas. And I don't like that, because the two are not comparable in the slightest. Alessa, who went on trial for using her telekinetic murder powers to kill her disgusting perv stepdad, was found not guilty. And I'm not mad about that, because he really was a piece of shit PDF who deserved it. He was literally attempting to force himself on her when she did it, so I'm not mad about that. But Alessa admits that she has done this other times as well, ostensibly for self-defense purposes. But then she is shocked when she is shanghaied and ends up in Hellebore. She is righteously furious and demands to be set free because she did not consent to being locked up so unjustly. Girly pop, you can murder and mutilate people with your mind. And while you have shown that you are capable of restraining yourself when you so choose to and make death quick and simple when you so choose to, you have also shown that you can literally rip people to shreds bit by bit if you so choose to as well. You are, I cannot stress this enough, a prime candidate for being locked up and away for everyone else's safety. God dang, at the end of this book, you literally say you're basically coming to wipe us all out, so apparently you being whisked off to murder school prison was kinda justified. That's it, really. I don't know what else to say about this book. It was messy, disjointed, poorly written in my opinion. The writing is purple and overly complex. The horror is almost non-existent and tries to rely on violence and gore, but it's so over the top and constant that it just becomes boring. The characters aren't memorable, and neither is the school or the setting. Any themes that this book were meant to have were pulled off so poorly. This is the last time I will be reading Cassandra Khaw. She is not getting a fourth chance.